I think let's start with an example that maybe we're familiar with or more familiar with, and that can also introduce some of the ways we can see how this goes, Bob. And so I'm going to pull up on the screen here some parallel passages relating to Goliath. So these come to us from 1 Samuel 17. So on screen here, we've got 1 Samuel 17 in the Hebrew Bible, in the Septuagint, Josephus's retelling of it, and then a version of this from 4Q Samuel, one of the Dead Sea Scrolls. And as you know, in 1 Samuel 17, in the Hebrew Bible, we get this height of Goliath as 6 cubits and a span, or approximately 9'9". Septuagint, however, has him at 6'9", which is then we see that repeated in Josephus and in the Dead Sea Scrolls. So I think a couple things with this example. One, how do these different traditions work together to help us understand, the process of redaction historically? But also, two, what about the nature of this change? Because this feels like, we're talking 6999. Is this just an oopsie? Is this just a small mistake? Does this even matter? Are we reading? Because this is one of those where I think people look at it and say, you're blowing this out of proportion. We're just talking about a height here. And so let's start with the manuscripts and then get into some of the why, because I think that's an important thing to start with.
Yeah, this is a good one to start with because it's just it's a change of a number, right? In the Hebrew, you have 6 cubits and a span, which is going to make it about 9'9". And the Hebrew text says this. And then remember, the Septuagint is supposed to be the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible. And in the letter of Aristeas, you have this incredibly compelling story that says, they went off in pairs, 72 of them, letter for letter. This thing is, perfect. And look, they came back and it's everybody's, this is the best translation ever. Okay, well, if that's the case, how come this translation says 4 cubits in a span, right? Test with the 4 in a span, 6'9", 6 in a span, 9'9". So which is it? Clearly, he's huge. Right. He's going to be a center in the Philistine Basketball Association. But is he 9'9", like this much short of hitting his head on the rim? Or is he 6'9", like a regular, power forward or a center in the PBA? The idea was always they must have miscopied it. The Hebrews got it right. The Septuagint, made a mistake. They made him smaller, right? And Josephus typically, by and large, follows the Septuagint, as does the New Testament, by the way. About 80% of the time when they're quoting scripture, they're going to follow the Septuagint. That was the Bible of the time. And so it was, the Septuagint made the mistake and the Hebrew was right because we want Goliath to be big, right? That makes the story better. But then all along comes the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls. And sure enough, here in the Hebrew, you get 4 cubits and a span. And all of a sudden now we're realizing, we've got this ancient source that actually has 4 cubits and a span. So maybe you actually had 4 cubits and a span in the Hebrew. It was properly transcribed into Greek, 4 cubits and a span. Josephus copied it properly, told the story properly, and somebody came along maybe after the Septuagint was created and wanted just like a fishtail, right? And the fish just keeps getting bigger, and they increased the size of Goliath. Or you've got 2 versions of the Hebrew story going, one at 6'9" and one at 9'9", and the 4 cubits in a span, that one was the one that got translated, and that one into the Septuagint, and that was the one that ended up at Qumran. So you've got this alternate tradition that was being copied, floating around, and it ends up at 6 cubits in a span. The point being that either a change was made, it looks like during the Hebrew text, right? Or you've got 2 versions of the text floating around. Either way, it's a evidence that you've got different versions, either by a scribal change or just by various traditions. You've got different versions of the text floating around.
And this is why the the presence of these different manuscripts is so important for our ability to do this. Because as you said, a lot of the times historically, the Septuagint has been viewed as a not perfect translation, and the preference typically goes towards the Masoretic texts readings. A lot of times, not always accurately though, because the Septuagint has been shown in some cases like this to agree with the Dead Sea Scrolls. But why is it then when we see, if Josephus, if we put him to the side and we say, okay, the Dead Sea Scrolls have this one, and maybe they're just following the Septuagint, why should we side with maybe the 2 versus the 3? Is there anything within that the more we have, the better? Or is this just one of those, maybe the 9 feels like we're trying to pump up our hero. We make the giant bigger and bigger and bigger. And so that's why maybe the change happens.
Yeah, no, it's a lot of times people say, well, this has so many different manuscript traditions. Look, that's got to be, but if this one's the earlier one, if the one that's the outlier is the earliest, then you can claim, okay, that might be the earliest, but an early scribe may have told the fishtail, right? Exaggerated something, and everybody likes the exaggerated tale, or that's the one that became the dominant manuscript tradition and goes on. And this one is actually earlier and more original. And I mean, you could make this argument if we looked at the New Testament. We won't do that too much today, but if the earliest gospel written, and Mark says something, and Matthew and Luke come along and correct it because Jesus wasn't in the tomb, after 3 days, they make this change to on the 3rd day, which is a little more, and then that's the tradition on the 3rd day. Just because it has more instances of it doesn't mean that it's the original. And again, I'll steal Bart Ehrman's, if it's copies of copies of copies of copies of copies of copies, it is possible, believe it or not, to photocopy or to, hand copy the wrong thing over and over and over again. So as long as that error, that change is made very early, that's the issue. So sometimes it's done because we want to make the story look better. I mean, who doesn't want to look better, right? So you do that early on, and you just hope that manuscript tradition goes away.